Yoon Jae-won signed a contract. The document secured the services of a crisis PR specialist to sanitize his reputation. The dry language concealed a deadly game. Meanwhile, at the National Security Agency headquarters, Kang Mi-rae was receiving a file marked Top Secret. It contained her new dossier, her identity, and her mission for the coming months. She didn't know that her very first professional assessment of his character would crack. She didn't know that access to his secrets would turn into access to his loneliness. Her decision to lie to her handler would be the first step in betraying everything she had been taught. And the moment when she instinctively shielded him from a bullet would forever divide her life into before and after. Kang Mi-rae received her assignment. She was summoned to the office of her supervisor, Byung-ho. He was straightforward. Target, the young boss, Yoon Jae-won. Objective, infiltrate, find his political connections. The dossier was lying on the desk. He's cautious, Byung-ho said. He doesn't let anyone new come near him. He needs a rock-solid cover story. Mi-rae studied the dossier. Jae-won was expanding his business and dealing with the press. Image was an issue. She had an idea. He's looking for a public relations specialist, she said, to sanitize his reputation. I could be that specialist. Byung-ho approved. The cover story was carefully crafted. Fake references, a career history, a phone number for background checks. Mi-rae passed all of Jae-won's security checks and was invited to an interview. She entered his office. He sat behind his massive desk, silently studying her resume. His gaze was cold and appraising. "Tell me why I should hire you," he said without preamble. His voice was even, emotionless. She spoke clearly about strategy, media analysis, and reputation management. He asked pointed questions, trying to find her weak spot. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Okay," Javon said. "You're on probation, but remember, I only tolerate results. And I don't like it when people meddle in other people's business." Mi-rae nodded in response to his terms, showing she understood the rules. "You'll get your first results in a week," she said, as coldly and matter-of-factly as he. Jae-won merely glanced silently toward the door. The interview was over. Her workstation was in a separate office next to his reception area. The window overlooked the courtyard. The computer was new, but clearly checked for surveillance software. The first few days passed in routine. She compiled reports, analyzed newspaper articles, and prepared innocuous press releases. Access to the real cases and to people in his inner circle was denied. Jae-won ignored her. Sometimes he'd pass by without even glancing her way, followed by stern men in black suits. He was a shadow behind the heavy door of his office. Meyer reported to Byung-ho every evening via encrypted channel. "The target won't let me in. No access to meetings, documents, or phone conversations." Continuing to work on the cover story, the curator's response came quickly and without sympathy. "Hurry up, don't drag it out. We need the names of his political patrons." She knew she had to act. One morning, as Jae-won was exiting the elevator alone, she stepped toward him, holding a clipboard with a schedule. "Mr. Yoon," she said, "to improve your public image, I need to understand your schedule, at least those events that could become public knowledge. Otherwise, my work is useless." He stopped and slowly turned his icy gaze on her. "You're too persistent for a newcomer." "I'm too efficient to work blindly," Mi-rae retorted, not looking away. A few seconds of silence hung between them. Then he nodded briefly. "Okay, I have a meeting with an architect today at 3 p.m. We're discussing a new public space, a charity project. You'll be present. Take notes for the press." He continued on his way, not giving her a chance to respond. This was the first small victory. Mi-rae returned to the office. She had gained access to the first ostentatious meeting. It was a step, but this wasn't what Byung-ho was expecting. He was expecting names, contracts, dark secrets. For now, all she saw was the image of a respectable businessman who wanted to introduce Yoon Jae-won to the world. The meeting with the architect was, as expected, pure show. Jae-won spoke of contribution to society, of social responsibility. Meyer took notes, knowing she wouldn't find a single useful detail for her real report. Gradually, her work schedule changed. Jae-won began assigning her more tasks related to his public activities. She accompanied him to social events and prepared speeches. He remained cool and reserved, but she was allowed closer access. It was while working nearby that Mir began to notice strange details. They didn't fit the profile of the ruthless Mafia boss in her dossier. One evening, she stayed late to finish a report. Most of the staff had already left. Passing the open door to the security room, she saw Javon talking to an elderly janitor. He wasn't giving orders, just talking. He asked about his wife's health, nodded, and listened to her long answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, he slipped an envelope into her hand. The old man bowed, his eyes shining. Javon quickly turned away, pretending nothing had happened. Another time, returning to him with signed papers, she paused at the door of his office. Music drifted through the heavy door. Not electronic or pop, but the complex, mournful strains of a cello. Classical. She stood and listened until the music suddenly stopped. She hurried in, pretending to have just arrived. He was sitting at his desk, his expression thoughtful and tired, and the office was silent. She didn't include these observations in her reports to Byung-ho. She wrote them down somewhere deep within herself. The image in her head began to crumble. Before her was not just a target, but a person, with his own contradictions. And that was dangerous. The awareness of this danger made Meyer even more attentive. She began looking for patterns, justifications. Could this simply be a well-rehearsed show for the audience? But the picture was different. She noticed how he treated his longtime driver, Kim. Jae-won never got into the car without asking, "How are you feeling, Juicy?" One day, the driver fell ill. Jae-won didn't hire a replacement, but canceled his trips for the day, telling security he'd be working at the office. Murray overheard him on the phone, his voice devoid of his usual coldness, ordering the best doctor to be sent to Kim and paying for all his treatment. At the next social event, Murray witnessed an influential official disparage Jae-won's elderly partner, calling him outdated. Jae-won's expression remained impassive, but that evening, the official suddenly faced serious scrutiny of his business ventures. The revenge was quiet and precise, but the motive Mireille realized was not profit but the protection of one's own, and the music became more and more frequent. Now, working late, she would sometimes hear its muffled sounds from behind the door. Piano sonatas, string quartets. It was his personal ritual, a way to drop his mask. He didn't know what she was hearing. Every night, the lines about political connections in Byung-ho's report remained blank. Instead, she wrote generalities about business and her schedule. The supervisor grew angry. His messages became shorter and harsher. "You're losing focus. What's wrong with you? Report your progress immediately." But progress wasn't in the direction he expected. Meyer saw the duality more and more clearly. By day, a tough, calculating boss whose orders were unquestioned. By night, a solitary man, listening to classical music and discreetly caring for the elderly in his circle. This contradiction drove her crazy. After all, her task was to simplify him to a single target. But he stubbornly grew more complex. She found herself lingering in the office for more than just surveillance. She waited for the first notes to softly ring out from the ceiling, and in those moments, her own legend seemed grotesque and false. Who was she here, in this quiet space between days? Not Kang Mi-rae, the seasoned agent, but a ghost stealing pieces of someone else's real life. Her reports to Byung-ho became increasingly sparse and formal. She'd learned to skillfully sprinkle them with useless details, creating the appearance of activity. Analyzing business contacts for possible connections. So far, no results. More time is needed to establish trust. Trust. The word now brought a bitter smile to her face. One late evening, after the music had faded, she mistakenly entered his office without knocking, carrying what she thought was an urgent document for signature. The office was empty, but an open book lay on his desk, a collection of old poems, and next to it stood a tattered photograph in a simple frame. It depicted a boy of about 10 and a smiling woman. Before Meyer could examine the details, she heard footsteps. She retreated abruptly, pretending she had just entered. Javan entered with a cup of coffee. His gaze slid from her to the table, to the open book. Nothing changed on his face, but a slight tension hung in the air. "Document?" he asked curtly. She silently handed over the folder. As he signed, he said without looking, "Next time, knock." "Forgive me," she said, and there was a genuine sincerity in her voice that surprised her. He looked up at her. His gaze wasn't cold, but searching, as if he were really seeing her for the first time, and not just her PR profile. "You seem a bit absent-minded today," he remarked. There was no reproach in his tone, more of a statement. "Just a lot of work," Mir lied, lowering her eyes. "Go away and have some tea." You look pale. He stared back at the papers, dropping the subject. This brief, almost mundane piece of advice resonated louder than any command. And at that moment, the comm in her ear, always silent outside of work hours, crackled to life. A sharp, demanding click sounded. Byung-ho's signal for emergency communication. Her handler, tired of waiting, was beginning to press for real. He demanded quick and important information from her, threatening her with consequences. And the world of music and tea cracked. The reality of the mission, cold and merciless, burst back. The ringing in her ear insistently demanded an answer. Meyer quickly left the office and climbed to the roof of the office building, where the ventilation shafts muffled any conversation. The night was cold. The wind blew right through her. "Why aren't you in touch?" Byung-ho's voice was like sandpaper. "I was close to the target." "I couldn't respond," Meyer said crisply. "Close to the target isn't a result. I need facts. Names, meetings, proof of his connections. What are you doing there? Taking a vacation?" Meyer gripped the railing. She could have talked about the poems on the table, about the photograph, about the music. But that wasn't the right information. It was nothing. "He's being cautious. He doesn't let me in on real work, only public projects." "Then make him let me in." The curator's voice was thick with anger. "You're not the first one to back down over a difficult object. If you don't want to become the next statistic, act now. You have a week. Bring something in person or we'll begin the operation without you. And you'll be recalled for a professional suitability review." The connection was lost. The threat was clear. Failure meant more than just resignation. It meant disgrace, a review, and possibly prison time for sabotage. Meyer descended. Now her every action became deliberate. She understood. The more data she collected and transmitted, the closer the end would come. The end for Jae-won, but also for herself. As soon as she gave up enough to arrest him, her mission would be complete. She would be yanked from this life. And she wasn't ready for that. She began filtering the information. Small details that could have formed evidence remained with her. Omissions appeared in the reports. Met with a city official. Discussed matters concerning the charitable foundation. She didn't write that she overheard the official hinting at special conditions and how Jae-won coldly refused, saying, "My foundation isn't for kickbacks." Byung-ho read her reports and grew angry. They were pure formal replies. The pressure grew. Every evening, a new conversation, increasingly harsh. He demanded specifics and she played cat and mouse, handing over crumbs and buying time she didn't understand why. She was defending herself. But from what? From the mission? From her handler? Or from the inevitable moment when she would have to choose whose side she was on? And deep down, she already knew the answer. She was choosing the side of that lonely man in the office, listening to music. And that was professional suicide. Realizing this, Mireille made a paradoxical choice. To deflect Byung-ho's suspicions and buy herself time, she needed to appear more involved in the work, and that meant getting closer to Jae-won. Not as an agent to a target, but as an employee to a boss. She was no longer just a shadow with a notepad. At meetings, she began asking questions not only about PR, but also about the essence of projects, logistics, risks, long-term goals. At first, his people looked at her with surprise, then with respect. Her analysis was sharp and useful. Javon noticed the change, too. One day, after a tough negotiation, he suddenly asked her for her opinion on the other man's behavior. She gave him a precise psychological profile. He listened silently, then nodded. "You're observant." This became their new dynamic. He began to delegate more sensitive tasks to her, not just image-related ones. Checking the reliability of a new counterparty, creating a psychological profile of the partner before a deal. She used her analytical skills, but she did it for him, not against him. They began spending more time together. Late evenings at the office were now filled with more than just silence. They discussed strategies and analyzed failures. He spoke to her not as an employee, but as an intelligent conversationalist. And one day, when an endless autumn rain was pouring outside and the work was finished, he didn't leave. He stood by the window, looking out at the wet lights of Seoul. "Sometimes this city seems like a giant machine," he said suddenly without turning around. "And you're just a cog that needs to be either lubricated or replaced." It was the first time he'd spoken of anything personal, of burden. Meyer froze. The agent in her screamed, That's the hook. Catch the information. But the man in her remained silent, listening to the weariness in his voice. Isn't it possible to become the one who controls the machine? She asked cautiously. He turned around. There was neither arrogance nor coldness in his eyes. Only heaviness. Being in charge doesn't mean being free. It means being responsible for every cog. And being afraid that one mistake will crush everything. He shared his fear with her. And in that moment, the thin line between legend and truth, between him and her, began to dissolve. It was no longer simply infiltrating, it was approaching, and it was more terrifying than any threat from Byung-ho. This new trust manifested itself in small ways. Now he sometimes asked her to stay after everyone else, just to talk about the day. They would sit in his office, the lights dimmed, and he allowed himself to be simply Yoon Jae-won, a tired man who hated opera but adored a particular little-known cellist who, as he said, plays the silence between the notes. He began confiding in her his plans not only for his image but also for his actual business, expanding into the legal sector, building those very same community centers. I want to leave behind more than just fear, he once admitted, looking out the window. Fear is an unreliable foundation. It crumbles along with you. She, in turn, ceased being a faceless specialist. She allowed herself to argue with him, defending her point of view during negotiations. And he appreciated it. You're not afraid to tell the truth, he once remarked, even when it's unpleasant to me. There are almost no people like that around me anymore. Late one evening, as they were working on a complex contract, he suddenly asked, "Do you regret anything, Miraisi?" The question caught her off guard. The cover story had been worked out down to the last detail, but the lie wouldn't come out of her mouth. "I regret," she said finally, looking at her hands, "that I sometimes play by rules I don't like for too long, and that I miss important things, thinking they can wait." She was talking about her real life, and he seemed to understand it on some deep level. "A familiar feeling," he responded quietly. "Only in my world, the price for an omission is often irreparable." At that moment, they fell silent. The silence in the office wasn't awkward, but intense. They looked at each other across the table, and the distance between them, physical and otherwise, seemed to shrink dramatically. She saw the weariness in the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his cheeks. He saw her bite her lip, something she only did when truly nervous. This wasn't the point in their rapprochement, but the culmination. They stood on the edge where professional respect and human understanding were about to cross over into something else, into the inevitable, into something her mission categorically forbade. The tension between them became palpable, like electricity before a thunderstorm. Now, whenever their fingers accidentally brushed over a shared document, they both flinched and looked away, but not immediately. Now his gaze lingered on her a second longer as she entered the office, and she could feel it on her back, even when she turned away. One day, after a major negotiating victory, he invited his team to dinner. He sat at the head of the table all evening, but his attention was riveted on her. He caught her eye across the table when she laughed at a joke one of his men made. As everyone was leaving, he stopped her at the exit, citing a forgotten purse. "You were shining today," he said quietly as the driver pulled away to fetch the car. They were left alone under the awning, beyond which the rain poured. "It was a victory for everyone," she replied, feeling her pulse quicken. "No," he stepped closer. "It was your victory, your strategy, your composure. I admire you, Kang Mi-rae." He called her by her full name, and it sounded like a confession. A drop of rain trickled from his hair onto her cheek. Her hand trembled, wanting to wipe it away. She clenched her fingers into a fist. "You've done so much for me, Master Yun. You have no idea." "Jae-won," he corrected. "When we're alone, call me Jae-won." From that moment on, they began to revolve around each other like satellites drawn by gravity. Their evenings together at the office now ended not with business talk, but with long silences filled with the unspoken. He began sharing childhood memories with her, not only the difficult ones, but also the bright ones. His first bicycle, the smell of the street after rain in the small town where he grew up. She, in turn, began to weave nuggets of truth about herself into her answers. That she, too, loved old black and white films. That she was afraid of heights. That she had always wanted to learn to play the piano. These revelations were bridges across the chasm of her lies. But at the same time, the burden grew. Byung-ho wasn't calling anymore. He was sending ultimatums. Final warning, you've crossed the line. Either information within 48 hours, or we act and you'll be held accountable. She deleted the messages, feeling the noose tightening. She tried to distance herself. One day she called in sick and didn't show up for work. Her phone was ringing off the hook. Business messages, and among them, one from him. Are you okay? I'm really worried. And then an hour later, another. I'm in front of your house. If you don't come out, just know that I'm here. She looked out the window and saw his black sedan in the rain. He wasn't blackmailing her with his presence. He was simply there, and she couldn't take it anymore. She ran outside, and without a word, he simply hugged her, as if he were afraid she would disappear. She buried her face in his shoulder, and for the first time in years, real tears, not fake ones, streamed down her cheeks. Their first kiss didn't happen in a romantic place. It was late at night in his office. She brought him some medicine for a raging migraine. He sat with his eyes closed, his fingers pressed to his temples. Without thinking, she stood behind his chair and gently massaged his temples. He froze, then relaxed under her touch. How do you do it? He whispered. It's a secret, she answered just as quietly. He took her hands, pressed them to his chest where his heart was pounding wildly, and turned. There was no pain or fatigue in his eyes, only pure, undisguised desire and a question. She leaned in and responded. It was a kiss, full of all the longing, struggle, and tenderness that had been building for months. In that moment, there was no mafia, no agency, no lies. There was only he and she. After that, everything changed completely. They began meeting secretly. These meetings were their sacred space, where she could be herself, a tired, frightened woman in love. He gave her a sense of security she'd never had. She, in turn, gave him the understanding and peace he'd been deprived of at his peak. But the shadow of the mission never went away. It began to loom between them in their most intimate moments. When he, playing with a strand of her hair, said, I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you, her heart bled. When she found a flash drive accidentally left in his apartment or a notebook with important numbers, her hands grew cold. She no longer searched for information. She was afraid to find it. Her love had become her greatest secret and her greatest betrayal. And she knew that sooner or later she would have to pay for such a betrayal. But for now, she was ready to pay any price for another day, another evening, another look from him, filled with distrust of the world except her. One evening, they were leaving a small private gallery where Jaewon had purchased a painting for his foundation. He was unguarded. It was their private, almost a date. The narrow alley was empty and poorly lit. And that was a mistake. 3 men emerged from the shadows. They weren't street thugs. Their movements were coordinated, their gazes cold. They were competitors. People from the Choi gang who had long wanted to eliminate Jaewon to take his place in the port schemes. Yun Jaewon, one of them said, stepping forward. A blade flashed in his hand. It's time to settle old scores. Jaewon instantly pushed Mireille behind him, adopting a defensive stance. Run, he said curtly, not taking his eyes off the attackers. But Meyer didn't run. Byun-ho's thought flashed through her mind. Any accident could eliminate the target without your participation. That's also a result. But the thought was immediately crushed by a wave of pure animal rage. These people wanted to harm her man. The first attacker lunged at Jaewon with a knife. He deftly dodged it and delivered a hard blow to his solar plexus. But the other 2 attacked from the flanks. Meyer didn't think. Her body acted on its own, following routines honed to the point of automatism. She stepped forward sharply, her heel digging into the kneecap of the nearest bandit with all its force. There was a crunch and a scream. The man collapsed. The second, distracted by his comrade, turned away from Jaewon for a split second. That was enough. Meyer acted swiftly and mercilessly. Her elbow slammed into her attacker's throat, a wrist grab, a sharp lever, and the knife fell to the pavement with a clang. She didn't stop, completing the painful hold, bringing him to the ground. It all took mere seconds. This wasn't a street fight, but the work of a highly skilled professional. The third man, the one Javan had initially knocked down, was trying to get up. Javan stepped on his knife-wielding hand, forcing it to open, and pressed his heel to his throat. Suddenly it became quiet. Only the heavy breathing and groans of the fallen. Jaewon slowly raised his head and looked at Mireille. He wasn't looking at the woman he loved. He was looking at the weapon he'd just seen in action. His gaze was shocked, distant, full of reassessment of everything he knew about her. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. And there was no gratitude in his voice. There was an icy edge cracked between them. Meyer froze. The seconds stretched on like an eternity. Around them, people groaned on the ground, but for them, the world narrowed to this alley and this question. Dozens of theories flashed through her mind, discarded one after another. Any lie would be too flimsy now. He'd seen it in action. "The man who just saved your life," she finally breathed out. Her voice was hoarse but firm. She didn't lower her eyes. "And if I had to do it all over again, I would do the same." Javon didn't break his gaze. He slowly lowered his leg, releasing the bandit, who immediately lost consciousness. He took a step closer to her. His face was in shadow, but she could see his jaw working. "Ordinary public relations specialists don't fight like this," he said, every word honed like a blade. "This is the level of special forces or special agencies." She neither confirmed nor denied. Silence spoke louder than words. "Were I being followed?" he asked. "Did you come to kill me?" His voice held not only rage, but also pain. The pain of possible betrayal. It pierced her sharper than any knife. "No," she blurted out passionately. She grabbed his hand, forgetting everything. "Never. Listen to me. Yes, I'm not who I say I am, but I'm not your enemy. I won't harm you." He looked at her hand clutching his sleeve, then looked up at her face again, searching for lies. He saw panic, the fear of losing him, and the truth, the very truth that had never existed between them before. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Someone passing by must have called them. "We're leaving," Javon said sharply, his tone shifting to command. He hadn't yet grasped the situation, but his instincts for survival and self-protection were stronger. He pulled her deeper into the alley, away from the glare of the streetlights and the approaching sirens. They walked in silence, his fingers gripping her wrist not like a lover, but like a jailer, or like someone afraid a ghost will vanish without answering. He pushed her into the black sedan that had pulled up in response to his call, climbed in next to her, and gave the driver an order. The car sped off. An oppressive silence reigned in the salon. He sat, turned toward the window, his fists clenched. A dark stain from a cut was spreading on his sleeve. She saw him trying to control himself, to keep from losing his temper, to think things through first. He wasn't one to act on emotion, but the wound of possible betrayal was fresh and painful. He drove her to her house without saying a word the entire way. When the car stopped, he finally turned to her. His eyes were dark abysses. "Tomorrow, at the office, at 9, you come and tell me everything. Everything. If not..." He didn't finish the threat. He simply looked at her, and that was enough. "And don't try to disappear. My men will be at your house by morning." He leaned over and opened her door, a gesture of finality. Meyer stepped out. The car sped away, leaving her alone at the entrance. She stood there, shaking with adrenaline and terror. She'd just revealed herself. Her mission hung in the balance. But what was even more terrifying was that she might have lost his trust and the man she'd fallen in love with forever. She'd saved his life, but it seemed she destroyed everything else. She didn't sleep a wink all night. She saw his gaze, full of pain and distrust. She heard his question, "Who are you?" She had a choice. Run. Disappear while his men stood outside the windows. Contact Byung-ho and report the failure, but the thought of never seeing Jae-won again was unbearable. And there was also hope. Tiny, irrational. Hope that he would see in her actions the truth, which was more important than all the legends. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, she entered the office. The entire team, including Hyun-woo, stared at her through an icy curtain of silence. The news had spread quickly. She walked past them, keeping her head up, and entered his office. He sat at the table. There was a bruise on his face. His arm was in a bandage. He didn't offer her a seat. He just watched. "Speak," he said. A single command. And she spoke. She didn't tell everything. She didn't name the agency. She didn't give away Byung-ho. She said the main thing. "Yes, I was sent after you, to find dirt, political connections. My primary goal was to destroy you." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But I didn't do it, and I won't." "Why?" His voice was empty. "Because I recognized you, not the one they wrote about in the dossier, but the one who listens to the cello at night, who helps the elderly, who dreams of opening clubs for children. I fell in love with this man, and yesterday when you were attacked, I wasn't an agent. I was a woman protecting the one she loved. Nothing else matters. He was silent for a long time, too long. Then he slowly rose from the table and walked to the window. You could have just let them kill me, and your mission would have been accomplished. I know. Or you could have seized the moment and finished me off yourself. I know. But you didn't. You fought at my side, exposing yourself, knowing that this was the end for you as an agent. He turned. There was no longer any ice in his eyes. There was weariness and some new deep understanding. It wasn't a calculation, it was a choice. Yes, she whispered. It was my choice. Javon came close to her. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. You risked everything for me, for the one you were meant to betray. In my world, such loyalty is more valuable than any vows. It erases any past. He didn't ask for details. He didn't demand the names of her superiors. In that moment, his mistrust didn't just melt away. It was reborn into something new, an absolute blind faith built on her sacrifice. He saw the essence of it. She had chosen him. That was enough. He let go of her and walked over to the safe built into the wall behind the painting. He entered the code and opened the heavy door. Inside were folders, hard drives, and a single key on a copper ring. He took it. I have a room, he said quietly. Only I know it. And now, you. Everything is there. Everything that could destroy me. Contracts, conversation logs, payment reports. Everything those who sent you were looking for. He handed her the key. The copper keychain lay in his palm, like the most terrible and greatest power of attorney she had ever given him. My life is in your hands, Meyer. Do you trust me enough to accept it? She looked at the key, then at his eyes, and slowly, without hesitation, she took it. The cold metal bit into her palm. In that moment, she crossed the Rubicon. She was no longer an agent. She had become his accomplice, his keeper of secrets, and her betrayal was now final and irrevocable. The key felt incredibly heavy in her hand, even though it was just a piece of metal. She squeezed her fingers, feeling the ridges of his beard imprinted on her skin. It wasn't a symbol of trust. It was a test, and a trap all at once. The room is behind the mirror in my private spa on the 3rd floor of this building, Javon said. His voice was calm, but there was a tense edge to it, as if he'd just fired a clip into the air, expecting a return fire. The code to the electronic lock is the opening date of my first legitimate business, October 27th, 07. He spoke the numbers, looking her straight in the eye as if drilling them into her memory. He wasn't just giving her access, he was giving her his Achilles heel. Why? Meyer blurted out. Her own voice sounded muffled. Why are you giving me this after everything? Javon slowly sat down on the edge of the table, his posture losing its former rigidity. Because yesterday you could have chosen any other path. Easy, convenient, profitable. But you chose the hardest one. You chose me, knowing it would ruin your life. He paused, choosing his words. For 30 years, I've lived in a world where every trust is paid for with betrayal. I've learned to see the difference between a lie and the truth of the moment. In your eyes yesterday, when you fought for me, there was only truth. I don't need to know anything more. He stood up and approached her again, but this time not as an investigator. He hugged her, held her close, and she felt his hands tremble violently. He was afraid, too, afraid of this step, this incredible gamble on her. But he took it. This key, he whispered in her ear, is not a pass to my secrets. It's a pass to my future, to the future I want to build. And I want to build it with you. But to build, we must first clear away the old rubble. Everything in that room is rubble. My past. Decide for yourself what to do with it. He let go of her and walked back to his chair, giving her space. His gaze said, Your move. Meyer stood, clutching the key painfully. A war raged in her head. One part of her screamed that this was the perfect chance. Go in, photograph everything, send Byung-ho, and complete the mission triumphantly. The other part, the one that was now stronger, realized with horror the enormity of this thought. Betraying him now, after this, that would be worse than murder. She slipped the key into her dress pocket. A simple gesture, yet so meaningful. I don't know what I'll see there, she said quietly, but I know I won't hurt you. Javon nodded, as if he'd been expecting that exact answer. For the first time in this conversation, something resembling a weak, tired smile flickered across his face. Then go. And see. Because once you leave that room, there's no turning back. Not for you, and not for me. He was right. This key opened more than just a secret door. It opened the point of no return. And Meyer, feeling the weight of the metal in her pocket, slowly turned and left the office to take the most important step of her life. She climbed to the third floor, to a private area accessible only to Jaewon. The mirror in the spa room was indeed a door. She inserted the key and entered the code, 27107. There was a soft click, and the heavy panel slid silently aside. The room was small, windowless and low-ceilinged. There was nothing sinister about it, just shelves filled with neat folders, a few safes, and a desk with a modern computer and scanner. The air smelled of dust and paper. This wasn't a warehouse for compromising material, but a meticulous archive. Meyer turned on the light and walked to the nearest shelf. Her professional eye immediately captured the essence. These weren't bare facts, but a narrative. Folders labeled Port, Invoices, 2015-2018, Negotiations with Advisor Pak, New Morning Foundation, Reporting. She picked one up at random. Inside were more than just dry numbers. There were transcripts of phone conversations in which Jaewon's cold, hard voice negotiated the terms. There were copies of payment orders for substantial sums to shell companies linked to prominent political figures. There were photographs, Jaewon shaking hands with a gray-haired man outside an expensive restaurant, the same park advisor whose name had cropped up in corruption scandals. She opened another folder. The Garam incident. It contained private investigator reports, photographs of the aftermath of the showdown, medical reports, and a transaction printout for a huge sum transferred to the family of a competitor's employee who had died several years earlier. Not a ransom, but a pension. From Yoon Jaewon, with a handwritten note. Ensure children's education until adulthood. Each folder contained this duality. On the one hand, crystal clear, indisputable evidence of involvement in the shadow world, in kickbacks, in violent oppression. On the other, traces of a man who tried to somehow control the chaos, who took responsibility even for those he should have hated. She sat down at the computer. It wasn't locked. Another act of trust or a test? She launched a search. The files were organized with military precision. She'd found the big fish they demanded of her, an entire network of connections between his construction business and people in the mayor's office and ministries. This archive alone was enough to put half a dozen high-ranking officials and himself behind bars for at least 20 years. Her hands instinctively reached for her pocket, where she kept the miniature scanner she always carried for such occasions. Instinct, drill. She pulled out the device, and she froze. She stared at the computer screen, where the lines of reports blurred together. Other images flashed before her mind's eye. Him, listening to the cello in the semi-darkness. Him, handing an envelope to the janitor. Him, speaking with pain in his eyes about the burden of power. Him, kissing her on an empty beach. Him, entrusting her with the key to his doom. Love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision. And at that moment, in that room full of evidence of his guilt, she made it. She slowly put the scanner back in her pocket. She took a blank sheet of paper and a pen from the shelf, and began writing a report for Byung-ho, the very one that would become her official professional suicide. No data confirming the target's significant political connections has been found, she concluded in her clear handwriting. The archive contains primarily financial reports from legitimate businesses and a charitable foundation. The risks of continued surveillance are high and the payoff is minimal. I recommend terminating the operation. She lied. She lied to her handler, to her agency, to her entire former life. She did it not for the sake of the mission, but in spite of it. Because she fell in love, and because she could not betray the one who, seeing her as an enemy, entrusted her with the most precious thing, the key to his own death. She folded the piece of paper, tucked it away, and left the room, quietly closing the door. The key in her pocket now weighed even more. It was the master key not only to his past, but also to her new, impossible, and only true future. The future of a traitor who chose love. She stood in the empty hallway before the mirrored door, resting her palm on the cold glass. A shudder finally overwhelmed her, not from fear, but from liberation. Years of training, indoctrination, living in the shadows, all of it crumbled in an instant before a simple human truth. She couldn't do this. She couldn't become the instrument of his destruction. It wasn't the evidence from the files that surfaced in her memory, but the details. Not the kickback amount, but the date on one of the documents. The day they first dined together and he laughed at her joke about the restaurant's tasteless decor. Not the photo with the politician, but his confused smile when she gave him a rare record of that very cellist. The archive was black and white, but her memories were colorful, vivid, real. She wasn't thinking about betraying the agency. She was thinking about almost betraying him. The thought of scanning those papers, sending them, and then watching as masked men burst into his office and he was led away in handcuffs. The thought made her physically sick. Her hand instinctively tightened around the key in her pocket, as if trying to protect what he'd entrusted to her. She realized something else. In all these months, he had never lied to her. He had manipulated, he had hidden, but he had never lied, and she had built an entire universe of deception between them. And now that she had the power to destroy his life, the only way to somehow atone for her lies was not to use that power, to renounce it, to burn the bridges to her old self. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to calm her trembling knees. Now came the hardest part, stepping out to him and meeting his gaze. She had to do it without lowering her eyes, because her decision was pure. For the first time in a long time, she was completely honest with herself. She was Kang Mi-rae, and she loved Yoon Jae-won. Nothing else mattered. She turned and walked back down the corridor. Every step echoed loudly in the silence, as if sealing her old life. She hadn't simply left the secret room, she had stepped out of her role, and now she had to live with the consequences. But for the first time, her heart, torn between duty and emotion, beat steadily and clearly. The choice had been made, definitively. The first thing she did was return the key to Javon. She entered his office, placed the copper keychain on the table in front of him, and looked him straight in the eye. "Everything you said is in there," she said quietly. "And I'm not taking anything from it. My mission here is over." He looked at the key, then at her. There was a hint of a final question, a final test in his gaze. But he only nodded. "I knew you'd make the right choice," he said. And there was no triumph in his words, only deep, bottomless relief. But her mission in the agency's eyes wasn't over. Now she had to lie not to him, but to them. And that was a different, no less dangerous game. That evening, in the complete safety of her encrypted channel, she contacted Byung-ho. His face on the screen was like stone. "Well," he said without preamble, "there must have been significant information." Mi-rae's expression was one of disappointment and cautious hope. "The archive is a trap," she said firmly. "Or bait. It's just the tip of the iceberg, legal documents and hints. Nothing that could be used in court. He's either paranoid about the main thing, or he's keeping it somewhere else." "What do you mean, hints?" Byung-ho narrowed his eyes. "Connections with low-level officials, from whom he's long since abandoned them. Old financial schemes that no longer work. He's showing it to verify. If I copied anything, he'd know. He controls everything." She spoke convincingly, pouring all her professional composure into her words. She had to sound less like a surrendered agent and more like a disillusioned, yet even more obsessed hunter. "I'm onto something bigger," she continued, lowering her voice. "His people mentioned a special deal with Advisor Pak. Not the one in the archives. Something more ambitious. But that takes time and even more trust. If we strike this piece of trash now, we'll forever lose the chance to get to the real big fish." Byung-ho was silent, studying her. The pressure was unbearable. "You asked for time. You got it. And what do I see? No progress, only excuses. The progress is that he entrusted me with the key to his secret archive," Mi-rae retorted, playing on his ambition. "This is an unprecedented level of access. He's testing me. The next step is access to live ongoing files, to those very connections. But if we rush, everything will fall apart." She handed him the same report, handwritten in the secret room. The one that stated there was no data. The electronic version was even more meager, full of jargon that masked the lack of substance. Byung-ho ran his eyes over the file. His face twisted with disdain. That's it? After all these months? That's all that's safe to take out now, Mireille persisted. The rest is in his head and in future deals. Give me another month. Just another month. If I don't come up with specific names and amounts, you can call me back and begin your operation. But if we fail now, all our work will go down the drain. He hesitated. He was angry, but her voice carried the conviction of a professional who sees his target. And he, a pragmatist, couldn't ignore it. Another month was not such a high price to pay for a potential resounding victory. Okay, he finally exhaled. A month, exactly. An interim report every week. And if I see water like that again, you know what will happen. You won't come home, Meyer. You'll disappear. The connection was lost. Mary leaned back in her chair, feeling her shirt stick to her back with cold sweat. She'd won a reprieve. A month. A whole month she could spend with Jaewon without looking back. A month during which something had to change. She'd bought herself time by lying to the man who could destroy her with a snap of his fingers. She was playing her most dangerous game. And now the stakes were higher than ever. Not just her life or his freedom, but their shared, fragile, newborn future. The first few days of this reprieve were like euphoria. She could look him in the eye without thinking about the weekly report. She could laugh without tasting the bitterness of lies on her tongue. But the euphoria quickly gave way to paranoia. She began to notice small things, the way Jaewon would fall silent when she entered the room with her phone in hand. The way his gaze lingered on her a little longer, as if calculating something. He said nothing, but the atmosphere between them changed. The ease was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful tension. She started making mistakes. Once, when he asked her about the details of the previous day's meeting with the editor, she hesitated for a second, forgetting the exact story she'd concocted. He simply nodded, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. Another time, her work phone, cleared of surveillance, vibrated in her purse in his presence. She ignored it, but he noticed. He always noticed, and there were her absences. Once a week, as if on schedule, she'd say she was going to the dentist, to a friend, to a reunion of former classmates. The reasons varied, but the pattern was clear. She always returned a little paler, a little more collected, with a shadow of fatigue around her eyes that even makeup couldn't erase. It was these absences that caught the attention of Hyunwoo, a veteran bodyguard who had never trusted that woman. For him, she was a convenient coincidence, who had fit into his boss's life too quickly and too perfectly. With Jaewon's tacit approval, he hadn't ordered it, but he hadn't forbidden it either. Hyunwoo began his own private operation. He didn't follow her closely. He was a professional. He placed a tracker on her car, monitored her routes. He recorded that her dentist had been in 3 different parts of the city in a month, and that the friend she was visiting, according to her registration, was a 70-year-old woman. He took photos. Mira sitting alone in a park, Mira engaged in an animated phone conversation in an empty underground garage of a shopping mall. Nothing criminal, but it was all very, very strange for a typical PR professional. Hyunwoo carefully folded these reports in circumstantial evidence. He hadn't yet brought them to Jaewon. He was waiting. Waiting for that one piece of the puzzle that would put everything in its place. And Mireille, feeling the pressure mounting from all sides, understood that a month's delay was no gift. It was a ticking bomb. And the clockwork counted down the seconds ever louder. The tension had become tangible. It hung in the air of their shared home, which now felt less like a refuge and more like a field of invisible mines. Jaewon became quieter. He asked her fewer questions about her day, but his silent observation became almost palpable. He could read a book, and his gaze, lifting from the page, would freeze on her, studying and impenetrable. He would catch her flinching at the sound of a motorcycle outside the window or deleting the browser history on the shared computer too quickly. One evening, he asked me point blank, "Do you need protection at these meetings of yours?" He paused before the word meetings, subtly implying he didn't believe they were innocent. "The neighborhood where your dentist is has been unsettled lately." The offer was wrapped in concern, but the essence was clear. "I know you're not doing what you say you're doing there. Let me oversee it." "No need," Mira answered too quickly, forcing a smile. "It's daytime and I'm always available. Don't worry." He nodded, but there was no conviction in his eyes, only caution, and disappointment that she was still keeping her distance. Meanwhile, Hyunwoo had grown bolder. He was no longer just watching from afar. One day, when she said she was going to the corner store, he appeared in the same aisle, pretending to choose a coffee. Their eyes met. He nodded silently, his expression stony. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. I'm here. I see you. After that, her paranoia reached its peak. She began checking her car for GPS trackers before every trip, and finding them, carefully removing them. She changed routes, using public transportation to cover her tracks. But the feeling of being watched never left her. She caught reflections in shop windows, shadows in alleys. It was a frustrating game of cat and mouse, where she was the mouse, unsure when the cat would strike. And at the center of this storm was Jae-won. He watched her torment herself. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that foundation couldn't hide. One night, he woke her from a nightmare in which she thrashed and muttered something about proof. He didn't question her. He simply hugged her and held her until her trembling subsided. In that moment, two feelings warred in his heart: growing anxiety and a stubborn, insane faith in her. He had given her the key to his own destruction. Now he waited for her to give him the key to her secrets. But time passed, and she only withdrew deeper into herself. The ticking of the bomb was becoming deafening. 2 weeks remained until the end of the grace period, and all the players in this game, Mireille, Jae-won, Hyun-woo, and distant Byung-ho, felt the clock about to strike midnight. All that remained was to determine whose game would end first. Meyer decided to take action. She couldn't stand this invisible noose around her neck any longer. On the day of her next absence, she did everything as usual. She got into the car, drove her usual route, then abruptly turned into the multi-level parking garage of a semi-abandoned business center. She had chosen the location deliberately. Few cameras, echo chambers, and plenty of hiding spots. She parked on the top, deserted level. She pretended to wait for someone, glancing nervously at her watch, and she sensed it. Not saw it, but felt it. An alien presence, a subdued breathing, a footstep muffled by the concrete. It was somewhere between the cars, 30 meters away. She abruptly stepped out of the car and headed for the stairwell, deliberately clicking her heels. The door closed behind her. She didn't bother going down. She pressed herself against the wall in a blind spot, out of sight from the corner, and froze, slowing her breathing. A minute later, the door opened silently. A figure in black cautiously entered. Hyun-woo. He surveyed the empty stairwell, his hand habitually resting on the handle of his jacket. At that moment, Mirai stepped out of the shadows. Looking for me, Hyun-woo-si? Her voice echoed through the concrete well. He turned around sharply, but wasn't scared. His face remained cold. You're acting strange, Mrs. Kang. The boss is worried. The boss or you? She took a step forward. How many weeks have you been following me around? What did you find? Are my trips to the dentist worrying you? I'm doing my job. I'm protecting Mr. Yun's interests. And you're a hole in his security. I knew that from day one. There were no more words. He moved toward her with quick, determined steps, intending to seize her. It had been his mistake to underestimate her. Meyer didn't back down. When his hand reached out to grab her shoulder, she reacted. Her movements were swift and brutal. A block, a wrist grab, a sharp lever that made him double over in pain. She didn't want to cripple him, but she didn't stand on ceremony either. A knee to the body, sending him flying backwards, followed by a precise blow with the edge of her hand to the shoulder, forcing him to let go of the potential weapon. Hyun-woo was strong and experienced, but his style was streetwise and rough. Hers was military, no wasted movement, focused on neutralization. 40 seconds later, he lay on the cold concrete, pinned by her knee to his back, his arm pinned behind his back in a painful lock. Listen carefully, she hissed, leaning close to his ear. I am not Javon's enemy. You may find that hard to believe, but it's true. Your surveillance endangers him, not me. Because if those who sent me suspect a breakdown, they'll be after him before you can blink. Do you understand? He wheezed, trying to break free, but the lock was too precise. He must know? He squeezed out. He knows everything he needs to know. Her voice broke. I'm on his side. Our only task now is to protect him. And you, with your stupid suspicion, are shining a spotlight on us. She pressed his face hard into the concrete, not so much physically as psychologically, showing him who was boss. Then she let go abruptly, stepping back. Hyun-woo rose slowly, rubbing his dislocated shoulder. His gaze was different now. Hatred still burned within him, but now it was mixed with aching respect and shock. He'd seen her in action. For real. And this wasn't some bodyguard's level. "Who are you?" he asked hoarsely, the same question he'd once asked Jae-won. "The one who saved his life in the alley, and will do it again. Remember that. Now get out. And if I see your tail again, we'll have a different conversation. And you're not leaving on your own 2 feet." She turned and walked away without looking back, leaving him alone in the semi-darkness of the parking lot. When she returned, she carefully tidied herself up. There were no bruises, only a slight tremor in her hands, which she suppressed with an effort of will. Jae-won met her in the living room. "Everything okay?" he asked, and genuine concern was visible in his eyes. "Yes," she smiled as sincerely as she could. "Just a long meeting. I'm tired." She came over and hugged him, hiding her face in his neck. She didn't tell him about the fight, because that would mean admitting to surveillance. Admitting to surveillance would mean admitting that he had serious reasons not to trust her, and that could set off a chain of questions that would lead directly to her status as an agent. She closed the circle of lies to protect the fragile trust that remained between them. But now there was another person in that circle, Hyun-woo, who knew everything and was silent. For now. The silence that followed the skirmish in the parking lot was ominous. Hyun-woo disappeared from view for several days. Mireille couldn't tell if he was keeping quiet out of fear, tactical considerations, or gathering new evidence for Jae-won. The pressure on that side eased, but that only meant that all the energy of anxiety had shifted to another front. Byung-ho. Weekly reports became a nightmare. She sent out empty messages, only to receive icy silence or short, sarcastic questions in response. "Is that all? Or, are you considering retiring within the mission?" Her month-long deadline was 3 days away. And then a message arrived. Not on a regular channel, but on an emergency, encrypted, one-time-only channel. It was from Byung-ho and consisted of one sentence. "Tomorrow, warehouse complex at the port of Incheon, 9 p.m. Do not show up. This is not a request, it's an order. If you disobey, you will be eliminated as a threat to the operation." A chill ran down her spine. They hadn't simply called her off, they'd gone all in. They'd identified a major deal. Shipments through the port had always been the most vulnerable and crucial part of Javon's business, and decided to catch him red-handed, with the cargo and all his men. Eliminated as a threat, that meant a sniper or assault trooper would be given orders to shoot to kill if she entered the area. He warned her, not out of kindness. It was her last chance to show loyalty, to disappear and save her life, or a final warning before being considered an enemy. She had no choice. Not showing up would be signing Javon's death warrant. He would take that deal. They would surround him, and a shootout would break out. He would either be killed on the spot or arrested and broken in prison. The thought that he could be kissing her cheek right now, this evening, unaware that his life would end tomorrow, was unbearable. She realized Byung-ho had given her exactly 24 hours, not to run away, but to say goodbye, to make her final, irrevocable choice. She left the room where she'd hidden the phone and went to look for Jae-won. He was in his office, looking through some documents, probably related to tomorrow's operation. Seeing her pale face, he stood up immediately. "Mireille, what happened?" She couldn't tell him the truth. Not now, but she could do the only thing left to do. I want to be with you today. Until the very end," she said. And there was such longing and determination in her voice that he immediately realized it wasn't just a matter of simple desire. He hugged her, feeling her tremble. "Everything will be okay," he whispered, but his voice, too, was uncertain. He sensed something, a gathering storm. Meyer clung to him, closing her eyes. Tomorrow at 9 p.m., their fate would be decided at the port of Incheon. And she had a plan, a mad and suicidal one, to go there and stand between him and those who wanted to destroy him. Even if it was her former colleagues, even if it cost her her life. Her reprieve was over. Now it was time for reckoning. Mireille spent the entire next day feverishly observing Jae-won. He was collected, businesslike, giving clear orders to his men about the evening logistics operation at the port. She saw him checking the weapons in the safe, his gaze growing cold and distant, the look of a boss about to do something. Every minute brought him closer to a trap. She couldn't wait until evening. At 6 o'clock, realizing he would soon be leaving for a preliminary meeting, she made her decision. She burst into his office, where he was alone studying a map of the port area. "Jawan, you have to listen to me," she blurted out, slamming the door behind her. Her breath hitched. "Tonight, in the warehouse, it's a trap. Don't go in there." He slowly raised his eyes to hers, but there was neither surprise nor alarm in them. There was only a tired, chilling emptiness. "A trap," he repeated in a flat, lifeless tone. "From whom, Meyer? From your superiors?" Her heart sank. He knew, not just guessed. He knew. I wanted to warn you. They're planning a takeover. There will be agents there. You can't show up." He didn't move. He just leaned back in his chair, his fingers clasped together on the table. "And when were you going to tell me? Just before you left? Or after they'd handcuffed me and you'd gotten your thanks?" "No." Her voice broke. "I'm not for them. I'm for you. I love you, you know that." "Do I know?" he said quietly, but every word struck like a whip. "What do I know for sure? That you lied to me from the first second. That your every word, your every look was part of the legend, and that now, when they couldn't do it quietly, they're coming to take me by force. And you stand here and say you love me. How can I believe that, Kang Mi-rae? Or is it not even your own name?" He opened a desk drawer and tossed several printed photographs onto the surface. They showed her in various locations, making idle phone conversations. Hyunwoo's reports, and the final, crucial piece of evidence, a CCTV image from her old safe house, where she had been spotted leaving a month earlier. The frame was blurry but recognizable. Nearby, in the corner of the frame, a partial license plate was visible, the agency's official car. "Hyunwoo brought this to me this morning," Jae-won said. His voice wavered, betraying the pain he'd been trying so hard to hide. "He was following you, and he found your real nest. You couldn't even cover your tracks properly. Or did you think I'd never check?" Mir stood there, unable to tear her eyes away from the photographs. All her defenses, all her lies, were exposed. Worse, she appeared helpless and incompetent in his eyes. "Everything you told me, about music, about children, about the burden, was that a lie too?" His question sounded without anger, only with a chilling melancholy. "No," she cried, tears finally streaming down her face. "That was the only truth in this whole nightmare. Yes, I came as an agent. Yes, I should have destroyed you, but I couldn't. I saw the real you and fell in love. Every word I said to you was sincere. I didn't tell them anything important. I lied to my handler to protect you. I knew he would kill me for it, but I didn't care. Because I chose you." She was gasping for breath, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She stood before him completely naked. No cover, no camouflage, simply a traitor in love with her victim. Javon looked at her. His stony expression cracked. Pain, rage, disbelief, and struggle flickered in his eyes. He wanted to believe, desperately, but the wound was too deep. "Why should I believe you now?" he whispered. "Because I'm here," she cried out. "I came to warn you, knowing you could kill me for it. I came to tell you to run. They're coming, Jae-won. They're on their way. Please, you have to believe me one last time." At that moment, the sound of cars braking sharply came from the street, followed by muffled screams and the first distant pops. Not gunshots. Those were stun grenades. The agents were already here. They had launched their assault earlier than Meyer had planned. Javon's expression instantly transformed. Personal drama was cast aside. His fighter instinct kicked in. He snatched his pistol from under the table. "It's too late to run," he said hoarsely, looking at her. "They're already here. The choice is yours, Meyer. Stay with me and fight, or go out and get your medal." He didn't wait for an answer. He tossed her the second pistol from the drawer. It flew through the air between them like a final bridge across the chasm of mistrust. And she caught it. At that moment, the office door was blown off its hinges with a roar from the explosion. Silhouettes in black, wearing helmets, appeared in the doorway. "Hands up!" But they were no longer listening to orders. Jae-won opened fire first, preventing the stormtroopers from entering. Bullets pierced the doorframe. Mi-rae jumped behind a heavy bookcase, taking a stance. Everything in her head shut off. Pain, betrayal, love. Only cold calculation, and the thought remained. Protect him. They didn't coordinate, but acted as one. Javon provided her with covering fire while she moved in short dashes to the other side of the room to pin the enemy. She struck precisely, sparingly, at legs, at arms, to disable, not kill. These were her men, and she didn't want them dead. One of the stormtroopers threw a tear gas grenade. Miri shouted, "Gas!" and Jaewon managed to pull his scarf over his face. She, holding her breath, emerged from behind cover in the dim light and neutralized two agents with blows from the butt of her pistol. They fought back, retreating toward the office's back exit, which led to the service corridor. Ambush awaited them around every corner, but their combined experience, his street brutality and hers, his practiced precision, was a deadly combination. They hacked their way through. In the hallway, Byung-ho himself met them with his group, his face contorted with rage at the sight of Mireille, gun in hand, next to Jaewon. "Traitor!" he shouted. "I've chosen a side," she shouted back, firing at a light fixture, plunging the hallway into semi-darkness. In the confusion and darkness, they rushed toward the fire exit. Shots rang out behind them, but they were no longer reachable. They burst out into the street, into the black smoke from burning cars, and disappeared down a narrow alley, leaving behind the wail of sirens and the cries of a failed operation. They ran blindly through back alleys and courtyards until they collapsed from exhaustion in an abandoned garage on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The air wheezed out of their lungs. They were covered in dirt, soot, and sweat. Jaewon leaned against the wall, the gun still in his hand. He looked at Mireille, who, her head down, was trying to check the magazine with shaking hands. In the silence, broken only by their breathing and the distant sirens, his voice sounded muffled. "Why? You could have gone with them, stayed safe." Meyer looked up at him. There was no lie or calculation in them, only weariness and pain. "I told you. I chose a side. Yours." He was silent, looking at her. All the anger, all the pain of betrayal still seethed within him. But over it rolled a cold, clear realization. He'd seen her in battle, seen her shoot her own to protect him, seen her burn all her bridges. For him. That didn't negate the lie, but it outweighed it. He tossed the pistol into the corner. The sound of metal on concrete was a single point. "It's over," he said. Not to her, but as if stating a fact for himself. "My life is here, my business, everything I built. They won't rest. And now they'll look for you too, as a traitor." He walked up to her, took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look at him. There wasn't love in his eyes, but a bitter determination. "Our love, it's impossible. As long as I remain who I am, as long as I'm Yoon Jaewon, someone like Byung-ho will always come for me. And you'll always be caught in the middle, or become a target for recruitment again. I can't give you that kind of life." Mir wanted to object, but he didn't let her. "I love you," he said with such simplicity that it took her breath away. "And that's why I have to let you go, until I become a different person." He wasn't talking about running away together. He was talking about ending his old life to give a new one a chance, so that their love wouldn't be a death sentence for both of them. Meyer looked at him, her heart breaking with understanding. He was right. As long as he remained boss, every morning could be their last. Around every corner, a competitor's bullet or an agency sniper's crosshairs could lurk. Their love, born of lies and forged in fire, couldn't flourish in this hell. She needed air, and he needed the peace he'd never had. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly, already dreading the answer. "I have to disappear," he said. "But not just like that. If I just run away, they'll find us, or use you as bait. We need to make Yoon Jae-won, the Mafia member, the target, the enemy, cease to exist, officially." He pulled a battered phone from his inside pocket, one of those untraceable ones. "I have one last resource, one operation I've been saving for a rainy day." He began dialing, his fingers moving confidently. "My main competitor, Pak, just got out of prison. He's eager to get his way, and he has connections to the same officials I do. He's the perfect candidate." He explained the plan to her briefly, matter-of-factly. He would use his last leverage and information from that same secret archive to plant irrefutable evidence against Park in the hands of the police and the press. Evidence that would look like his main deal. And at that moment, he himself would supposedly be killed in a shootout during an arms transfer, a setup orchestrated by his most trusted men. As far as the world was concerned, Yoon Jae-won would be dead. All that would remain was a man without a name, without a past, indebted to those who helped him. "That'll buy us time," he said, looking at her. "A year, maybe two. Until everything settles down, until Pak sorts out his problems. and the agency is satisfied with eliminating the target. In that time, I can become different, start from scratch, clean. For the first time, his voice held not hope. Hope was too dangerous a feeling for him, but possibility. The possibility of another life. And me? Mira asked. You'll go back to your life, the one before me. You're free. The agency will consider you dead or compromised. They'll leave you alone if they don't see a threat. You have to live, in plain sight. Honestly. He wasn't asking her to run off into the sunset with him. He was asking her to wait for him, or not. He was giving her a choice and a freedom she hadn't had since the beginning of her career. It was the most generous and most painful gift. The plan worked. The news exploded with headlines. Bloody showdown at the port. Boss Yoon Jae-won killed. His rival Park caught red-handed. There was evidence, witnesses, even a blurry corpse photo. The world followed the story of the fall of one crime boss and the rise of another, unaware that the main character of this drama was quietly living in a safe house, awaiting his final meeting. A week later, late at night, Meyer received a text message with the coordinates of a small boat dock. She arrived. Fog hung over the water, obscuring everything beyond 10 meters. Jae-won was waiting for her at one of the docks. He looked different. Simple dark clothes, no expensive watch, the look not of a boss, but of a man who had left the world behind. Next to him stood old Kim, his faithful driver, one of the few who knew the truth and helped. Everything is ready, Javon said quietly. In an hour I'll be at sea. From there, somewhere. Mir couldn't speak. She simply looked at him, trying to memorize every feature. I'll wait, she finally breathed out. No need. He shook his head, but a spark of warmth flashed in his eyes. Live. Become who you wanted to be before all this began. If fate is merciful, if I can shed this skin and become pure, I will find you. I promise. He took a step and hugged her. It was a farewell embrace, containing their entire short, vivid, and tragic story. Forever, he whispered in her ear, and he let go. Old man Kim coughed softly, signaling the time had come. Jae-won met her gaze one last time, nodded, and disappeared into the fog, stepping into the boat. A moment later, the soft sound of the motor faded into the night. Meyer stood on the pier until the fog began to thin and the first glimmer of dawn appeared on the water. He was gone, but his promise lay like an anchor in her heart. She didn't leave immediately. She stood staring into the void where the outline of the boat had just vanished. His whisper still rang in her ears. Forever. The word wasn't a romantic vow, but a contract signed in blood, betrayal, and saved lives. It meant that wherever he was, his path now led to her. And wherever she was, her door must remain open. She felt something hard pressing against her chest beneath her clothes. She pulled it out. The copper key. The very one from the secret room. He'd left it in her pocket in their last embrace. Not as a reminder of the past, but as a symbol of the future. As if to say, here's the key. Someday we'll unlock something new for them. The disposable phone buzzed in my pocket. The last contact. One message from an unknown number. Blank slate, write your story. I'll read it. Someday, D. The tears she'd been holding back finally came. Quiet, cleansing. She deleted the message, disassembled the phone, and tossed the parts into the water. A ritual of completion. She turned and walked away from the pier into the gray light of the coming morning. She had no home, no job, no past. But she had a promise and a key, and that was enough to take the next step. The first step into her own, real life, where she would wait. Not passively, but living, so that she would have something to tell him when he returned. If he returned? Javon's boat had long since disappeared over the horizon. A city awaited her. A city that now seemed empty and yet simultaneously full of possibility. She left the pier, leaving behind the fog and the sea, carrying with her the heaviness of the key and the lightness of hope. A year passed, a year of silence. No calls, no messages. To the world, Yoon Jae-won was dead, and Kang Mi-rae had been fired from the agency for loss of trust and professional incompetence. She wasn't being pursued. She was simply erased from memory, like a failed experiment. She didn't hide. Using her real documents and meager savings, she rented a small apartment and found work. Not in PR, but at a municipal center helping children from disadvantaged areas. She organized clubs, looked for sponsors, spent time with teenagers who had no choice. She did what he dreamed of. Each child she helped was a quiet message to him. I remember, I'm waiting. Sometimes in the evenings, she would take out the copper key and hold it in her palm, feeling the cold metal. It reminded her that somewhere out there, a person is shedding their old skin. That forever is not a moment, but a process. And so, on an ordinary rainy evening, as she was finishing a report on her computer, a message arrived on her personal phone. An unknown number. Just one word. Forever. Her heart skipped a beat as if struck by electricity. It could have been a joke, a trap, an accident. But she knew. It was him. He had made himself known. He was alive. And he remembered. She didn't answer. She simply clutched the phone to her chest and closed her eyes, letting a wave of relief and happiness wash over her. The promise hadn't been empty. Their story wasn't over. But across town, in an expensive restaurant, a man with graying temples and cold eyes sat at a table. It was Park. He'd been released due to lack of evidence, but his career and reputation were in ruins. And he knew who had framed him. Several photographs lay on the table in front of him. They showed Mireille leaving a children's center. A report given to him by a secret informant, former agent Byung-ho, fired after the failed assault and now thirsting for revenge and money. So, this is the woman? Puck said quietly, running his finger over her image. The ghost's weak spot. If we find the ghost, we'll find him. And her, we'll use her as bait. The shadow of a new conflict fell upon the city. Meyer, sitting in her cozy apartment with her phone in hand, didn't yet know that her hope and her love had once again made her a target. Her anticipation had just taken on a new, dangerous price. 3 days had passed since that message. Meyer lived in a state of limbo between euphoria and anxiety. She didn't tell anyone, checking the situation around her house. Her instincts, dulled by a year of peaceful life, were once again heightened. And then she noticed surveillance. Not blatant, but noticeable. A black sedan, flashing too often in the area around her work. Meanwhile, in a secluded estate outside the city, Park and Byung-ho shared cognac. Their union was one of resentment and hatred. She's his only connection to this world, Byung-ho said, examining fresh photographs of Mirai. He'll make his presence known again, or he already has. We just have to force her to lead us to him, or force him to come for her. Park nodded grimly. My men are already around her, quiet. But if pressure is needed, she has a weak spot. Those children she's looking after. Mireille, unknowingly, found herself in the middle of a silent hunt. Her joy at the news was tainted by the shadow that once again loomed over her life. But this time, she wasn't an unarmed undercover agent. She was Kang Mireille, a woman who had already lost everything and made her choice. She pulled out an old, obscure phone bought a year ago, just in case, and she sent a single word into the void, hoping for a signal. Carefully, somewhere far away, in another country, a man starting his life anew shuddered when he saw that word on the screen of an encrypted device. He understood everything. His disappearance hadn't been perfect. His love was still his vulnerability. And his promise of forever now meant more than just a return. It meant war. For her, for their future. But this time, on his terms. The boat's quiet engine gave way to the roar of a powerful motor. He looked at the horizon, his face, changed by a year of peace, regaining its familiar hardness. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about the end. The final end of everything that could threaten what he left behind. He needed to become a ghost again. But this time, a protective ghost. Their love story, which had begun with a lie and survived the fire, was entering a new chapter. A chapter where they would not wait, but fight again. But this time, not on opposite sides, but shoulder to shoulder, even on opposite sides of the world. The key in her pocket and his promise were more than just symbols. They became their weapon and their plan.